Hello, this week we're going to talk about pastoral counseling, spiritual counseling with youth. And it's such a broad subject. I'm going to try to highlight some basic components of this subject. I think the first thing that we need to delineate is the developmental aspect of this. So I think the easiest way to group this population developmentally would be, I guess we could call them children and adolescents. So elementary school to middle school. That's a broad range in itself, but elementary to middle school. So basically, first grade through seventh grade, probably. Seventh grade, you're really getting into adolescence, puberty, all kinds of very different issues. But one good way to divide this is often the way school systems divide it, because that's kind of also the way children and adolescents divide themselves in their own mind by grade level. So you usually don't get much hesitation with students joining groups for a specific age group or grade level in other areas of their lives, such as spirituality. The second group would be high school. So 8th, ninth, 10th, 11th, and 12th. That's a broad range too, but you're no longer in middle school. It's junior high, high school, or all high school, depending on how they divide it. Now, that's a good division too, because the way socialization occurs changes. Specifically with things like dating, friendships, activities, what people are allowed to do, things like driving, gaining more freedom, and the way people are beginning to think about their future at that age. So they're thinking about, what am I going to do after high school? There's also more adult decisions being made in all of the domains, and we'll talk about those domains as well. And the third group, which you may think is a little older, but I would consider it young adult. So basically college age, whether they're in college or not, young adult, college age. So probably like 17 or 18 to 21, 22. People in that age group are going through very different things depending on their environment. So if they go out and get a job after high school, that's very different than going to some type of higher education. Two very different scenarios. Often different levels of maturity, or what is expected of these individuals, the way they see the world, the amount of independence they have, things like that. But a lot of the same maturity thought processes going on, relationship processes, things like that. So the first thing when we think about counseling youth and spirituality, we're looking at it from a developmental standpoint. The second thing, which is something that we consider in all areas of counseling, not just spirituality, is the domains. And three primary domains: psychosocial, which is very important in this situation, academic, career, and physical. Physical could come into play for a number of different reasons. If somebody is having health problems, definitely. If somebody is experiencing stress, or um, perhaps is an athlete and gets injured or something like that. But also, of course, any type of physical uh, causes for psychological problems as well. Normally, with this population and spiritual counseling, we're not getting into severe diagnoses where it comes to DSM diagnoses. So we're primarily, and then academic career. A lot of that has to do with school counseling or career counseling, unless it involves some type of helping profession, which the client would feel as though we would have some important input. Many times, young adults might feel lost or uncertain in their search for meaning, and the search for meaning includes, what am I going to do with my life? Transcending dichotomies. Am I going to be miserable in the career path I choose but make a lot of money, or am I going to enjoy my chosen profession? And transcending dichotomies means turning work into play, enjoying your work. People spend 8 hours a day or more in their daily jobs. That's a lot of time not to enjoy what you're doing. 40 or more hours a week of your waking hours. So it would be appropriate to talk about meaning, finding meaning in career choices. I think the primary thing that we discuss with youth and young adults really is about psychosocial interests. That includes an awful lot. So when I think about how we work with youth in a number of different settings, I think when we're talking about pastoral counseling or spiritual counseling, it may be if they have a physical illness or something like that in a hospital setting or hospice or something like that. But for this lecture, we've covered that in another lecture. For this lecture, we're really going to focus on kind of the normalized day-to-day encounters with these age groups. So in most cases, we would be dealing with them in individual meetings or in some type of social grouping. So, for instance, and once again, I'm just speaking from my own experience. When I was getting a master's degree in seminary, one of the jobs I had was working for a church as a youth director. And I loved that job. But this setting could be placed in a lot of different areas. So any type of youth group. It could be a YMCA, a YWCA. It could be working with any type of external group, with any type of religious or faith organization. A lot of different possibilities. I'd like to hear of some of the groups you might have been involved in yourself as a child or that you work with as an adult. Tell me some of the things that you do or experience. Let me share a little bit about some of the things I experienced. So one of the things I wanted to do was create developmentally appropriate groups And by that I mean dividing up activities among those three groups that I mentioned. So you've got the child and adolescent, elementary and middle, you've got high school, and then you've got young adult. So as I was moving through my position as a youth director, I was always running three different developmental age groups. So each week, there were at least three different activities going on, one for each of those groups, at least maybe every other week, at the least. So I think it's important to have a combination. If you're working not as an individual counselor, but as part of an organization, to really think about kind of a curriculum for 4 seasons. If you're working with youth in drug and alcohol settings, we really have to consider it from a developmental standpoint as well. Each age group and each individual is on their own belief journey, their own search for meaning. The first thing that we have to understand is that we have to take each person at their own developmental level. Some people are highly intelligent. Some people are highly empathic. Everybody has their own gifts and struggles. Everybody has their own experiences. Some children have been abused. Some children have experienced poverty. Some children have been in the foster care system. So we also have to understand their experience. How did they come to this place? Emotionally, psychologically. What is their understanding of meaning? Do they have a belief system? Things like that. We also have to understand what are the priorities in their minds at each age group. Acceptance, formation of friends and peers, a sense of security and trust, things like that. Eventually dating, finding significant others, contemplating what's going to happen if I leave my home and my friends and go to a school someplace or join the military. Understanding the risk and the unknown, the fears that they may be experiencing when anticipating change. And it's different in every setting. The other major setting I could consider this taking place would be some type of drug and alcohol treatment facility for youth and young adults. And I know some of you have experience in that area, and I'd like to hear your take on that. That's a different struggle, and yet still a search for meaning and a self-identity. So when I'm thinking about groups, it's usually and scheduling and coming up with kind of a curriculum based on 4 seasons and things like that. It's usually a combination of social activity and fun, but also there's some type of meaning within that activity. Could be taking my youth group to visit a temple or synagogue, to visit maybe a Muslim temple, a Jewish temple, things like that, to experience different cultures, to do mission activities, to have a weekly meeting, a weekly youth meeting where they can talk about their struggles, find out that there is some universality, that other people are experiencing the same struggles in both faith and belonging and school and friends and peers and whatever it might be. Creating a place to belong and feel safe was one of my top priorities, where they felt free to talk openly, where they felt safe with the other people, where they could form bonds and relationships with friends, and also experience some education and some growth in spirituality, meaning, things like that. A lot of times people question some of the other things we've discussed: grief, loss, afterlife, after death. There's a lot of big questions that young people begin to ask at each developmental level. Another thing that I think is addressed quite a bit is moral questioning. So individuals are torn between right and wrong, between choices, usually relating to belonging, being accepted by others, or struggling within between wants and desires and what is ethically right or wrong in their own lives, values. And we did talk a little bit about the difference between ethics and values. So one thing we can do is have a discussion about values, about ethics, about situations and scenarios, and making choices, and how our choices not only affect ourselves, but they affect others. How to create empathy so that we do our best not to hurt others. How choices we make today affect our lives in the future. So all of those choices really has a lot to do with reality therapy. And I think William Glasser had a really nice theory when he worked with youth in correctional facilities and troubled youth. And I think that reality therapy or choice theory really does work well with adolescents into young adulthood. The primary basis of choice theory is relationship. Understanding how to be in a relationship positively. What's a healthy relationship? What's an unhealthy relationship? Both friend, partner, whatever it might be. And then he talks about basic needs in the quality world. Then he talks about basically taking personal responsibility for our choices. And this has different meaning at different ages because we're going through different social, emotional, and different psychosocial activities. Relationships are different at every age. But talking about taking personal responsibility for our choices, all of those things resonate very well with children, adolescents, and young adults. On another level, individual counseling. Individual counseling is also important, And I think it's a little different, though, because um, they are coming to you as an individual counselor um, with a specific reason in mind, with a problem, question they're struggling with, something like that. So when we work with youth, adolescents, young adults individually, there is usually a very specific reason that we need to consider. And that questioning, that issue that they bring to the session, will usually dictate the most effective therapy within your broader therapeutic practice. As we move through to young adult, I had an excellent experience when I was a professor at Chatham University, and when I was there, it was an all-female university, but they needed an advisor for a Christian youth group they had, and I volunteered, and we met every week, and I think one of the most important things to begin with in any therapy, but especially this type of group activity or pastoral counseling, spiritual counseling, would be building trust. And it was very important for me there because I was the only male. So, building trust within the group. In fact, the first month or two, all we did was trust-building activities, sharing of our personal experiences, having activities that build trust, that are also fun. And if you ever do the falling activity and you blindfold somebody and they count to 10 and fall, make sure you tell them what direction to fall. Fortunately, I did that. But I saw a cartoon on the internet and they fell the wrong way. So I think that one of the other theories that really works well with youth, young adults, is Adlerian theory. And the reason I think it works well is because youth and adolescents and young adults are so caught up with self because they're developing self-identity. They have self-doubt. They are worried about being accepted. It can be somewhat narcissistic in a non-clinical diagnostic way. But one of the things that helps quite a bit is Adler's concept of Gemeinschaftsgefühl. And what that means is community feeling. So I remember one time in my life when I experienced grief and loss, both through the death of a loved one, but also loss of a relationship and a change of career paths. And I was feeling down and depressed, and I did all the things that counselors do through self-examination and talking with others and other counselors and things like that. But I just wasn't coming out of it. In fact, the more introspective I became, the more depressed I became. But the one thing that helped was Adler's concept of community feeling. And I think this is good for anyone, whether they are experiencing a emotional issue or just caught up in their own worlds, questioning. And what Adler recommends is that we look outside of ourselves, that we volunteer, that we become part of an outside group, that we help other. So the focus, the first thing that happens is our focus shifts from self to other. Now, they've done a lot of tests, and actually looked at brain chemicals that are produced. And people get a great feeling when they receive a gift, like during the holidays. And it creates some specific brain chemicals like serotonin that create happiness. And the interesting thing about the studies is that the same chemicals are produced and the same sense of happiness and well being is produced when we give to others. So giving is really just as good, if not better, than receiving. We get the same chemical response. We get the happiness. We get the sense of well being. But we also get other things as well. We get a connection with others. We get a sense that we are looking outside ourselves. We're no longer distracted with our internal struggles. So we get a break from that. We get a sense of doing good. If we volunteer as part of a group, we also begin to build a social support group for ourselves. So when people are feeling down or struggling with some issue, they often isolate, especially adolescents. So rather than isolating, we're forcing ourselves to actually participate in a group, especially a volunteer group or something like that. And that actually begins to create a support network. It begins to help us to feel as though we are part of a community. And that's what really helped me. And I think that that's one thing that I always do with youth, adolescents, and young adults is begin to participate and help them to understand that giving feels even better than receiving, and it helps us to bond with a social network, a support group, and it helps us to understand what others are experiencing empathically. It also tends to put our own worlds into a little better perspective. With saying all this, I know it's a little vague still, but the only thing I can really add at this point is if you are seeing child, adolescent, young adult individually, use all of your regular counseling theories within the context of if it's faith-based, if it's belief-based, they're searching for meaning, whatever it might be. But all of those things would be applied to an appropriate developmental age. I think one of the biggest things with adolescents, high school, and young adults is really fear of the unknown and a lacking of direction. And that goes back to that question, well, what do I do with my life? And it's really a fear of making the wrong choice, if there is a wrong choice. So I usually take them through kind of a discussion about meaning and happiness and what they are fearing. Many times a fear of the unknown is also a fear of failure, and if they feel as though they are going to fail, that they will not be accepted. And here that phrase comes up, I'm not good enough. Good enough for what? And it's always deep down good enough to be loved unconditionally. So that's usually the pathway I take with that type of questioning. It's a fear of being loved and accepted unconditionally by the people in their lives, family and friends, even if they fail or make the wrong choice or whatever it might be, take a chance, a risk. So unconditional love and positive regard is usually one of the most important things. I hope this lecture was helpful, and I hope to see some more discussion of your own experiences and thoughts on this subject in our posts. Thanks.